Alright, if you'd like to create multiple frames or multiple pages in a project, the first thing you need to do is add these extra frames, and they're called internal frames. So if you go over to the navigator, you can right click on the J frame, which is the original design, and when you right click on that, you have the option to add from the palette. You can select in the first menu of swing containers, go down to the internal frame, and that represents a new page. So one of the things you'll want to do right away before you start adding multiple pages is actually just change the layout to absolute. So if you right click on your first J frame, you can set the layout to absolute, and now you can actually start putting things on here, and they won't overlap, and they won't start moving around features that you have. So we'll make this a little bit bigger, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these pages the same size as my original. So I'm going to move this and extend it to be the same size as my original J frame. And I'm going to give this internal frame a name. I'm going to call this page 1. Now if I want multiple pages, I can obviously go ahead and add other frames. So I'll do that again, and I'll right click on the original J frame, add from palette, swing containers, internal frame. I can do that again and resize that to be the same size as the others. So I'll call this page 2. Now I've got 2 pages in my program. So what can you do to be able to communicate between these? So let's just say we went to page 1, and we can see that we're on page 1 now that it's highlighted. We can't quite tell right from the design, but it's highlighted in the navigator. So on page 1 I will add a button and a label. The button, let's change this to say go to page 2, and we will change the variable name to reflect what this button does. So this is the go to page 2 button, and we'll call this to page 2. And the label will say what current page we are on. So this is page 1. I'll do the same thing to the second page. So notice that those 2 items, the label as well as the page, the button, are both under page 1. Now if I go to page 2 and I double click, I can open up page 2, and I can add some features to page 2. So let's make that visible. And once that's visible, I can do the same thing to page 2. So I can add a button as well as a label, and we'll change these as well. So this button will say go back to page 1. And we'll name this my to page 1 button, and then my label will say that this is page 2. So I've got a button and a label on each page. Now what we can do is we can change the code on the button so that when it's clicked, it actually moves us from one page to the next. So if I go to that first button, the to page 2 button, I can double click on that, or rather either button. I can double click on the to page 1 button. If I go back to my design, there we go. I've got the to page 1 and the to page 2 button. So what I'll do here is if I want to go to the second page, I'll go and underneath the to page 2, I will say that I want to make page 2 visible. So I'll use the set visible command, and I'll pass it a Boolean variable of true, meaning page 2 will now be visible, and I want to make page 1 invisible. So I'll say page 1 dot set visible, that's false. So I've made page 2 visible, and I've hidden page 1, and I can do the same thing over here. Once I'm in the second page, I can make page 1 visible, and I can make page 2 invisible. In a sense, I'll set the visibility to false. Alright, so there's one more thing we need to do here. We actually have these correctly changing between pages, but when we start the program we want to make sure Java NetBeans knows which page to actually show when you start. So if you go back to the design, there are properties of each of these pages. And if we select, for instance, the page 1, I can go back to the property menu, and I can look at the bottom, and page 1 should be automatically set to being visible. Same with page 2. So right now I'm on page 2. Rather, here we are. We're on page 1 now. This is the one that we want to be able to be visible when we start, so that checkbox is selected. That's great. If I click on page 2, I want this to be invisible. So when the program runs, I don't want page 2 to be showing. So I'm going to actually deselect this, and now page 2 is not visible. So now if I go and run my program, I should see page 1 when I begin, and when I click on those buttons, they should alternate me between page 1 and page 2. So this is page 1. We can see that that's what I'm seeing when I start the program. And when I go to page 2, it brings me to page 2, and I have the option to go back to page 1. And I can click these and go back and forth. So in terms of your program, you want to add features to the pages or multiple pages to a quiz. You're going to have many pages within your program, so just make sure that you're keeping track of where they are. They should all, within this navigator menu, they should all kind of be aligned. So in terms of your pages, notice here my page 1 and page 2 are on top of each other, and you can kind of see which features are in each page as well. So use the navigator to make sure you can keep track of your pages, what features, what tools are in each page, and to make sure you've got them named properly so you know what buttons, for instance, belong to which